let me just mention anarchism, conservatism, socialism, communism, fascism, nationalism, multiculturalism. I think we should touch a lot on globalism and try to flesh this out, because it's a term that is used frequently. And also authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and also the term far right.
Sure.
Yeah. Should we start with globalism? Because it's a term that it's a bit more recent. And in a sense, we are on, relatively speaking, uncharted territory with respect to other terms.
Sure. Well, globalism, in the sense that we use it at Lotus Eaters, is normally a pejorative term to mean that you're putting the interests of an unsituated elite or those of foreign countries above your own national self-interest. So it's basically a proxy for whether you're a treasonous scumbag or not, which is a very loaded way of defining it, but it's also probably how people see it. But you can also take a slightly less wrapped up in modern politics interpretation of it and say, if you're in favour of, say, free trade, you support globalism. You know, I support free trade. I think that if someone has goods that we want, we should be able to trade with them if it's to our benefit. It doesn't matter where they are, really. There are countries that I would make an exception to because trading with them might not do us any favours geopolitically. But generally speaking, you know, in that sense of globalism, I would probably agree with it, where you're basically just exchanging goods for your and the other person's benefit. I don't see anything too bad about that necessarily. It can also be done socially irresponsibly, in that, you know, we got rid of all of our steel manufacture, so if we have to do something that is related to national defence and we're reliant on a foreign power, that might be a problem. Or you could look at Britain in World War II, where we were sort of economically globalistic, and it made us vulnerable for the because we were importing a lot of food. It meant that the Americans could take advantage of our situation and make us pay very inflated prices for the goods that we received in World War One and Two from them. And part of the reason why the British Empire had to be broken up. I mean, they knew what they were doing as well. So the Americans did it by design. But that would be an excellent example of where globalism exposed a weakness in a nation, and another nation was there to exploit it. And so it's an inherently nation-focused term, I think it is fair to say. But I think most people's exception is to political globalism rather than economic globalism, because I think economic globalism can be done correctly, and there is a form of it that I take no exception to, sort of economic globalism with caveats, if you will, whereby there are conditions in which you might behave protectionistically, or you can have elements of globalism and elements of protectionism alongside each other. But the political globalism of viewing the nation state as insubordinate to a greater global good, or something along those lines, is, I think, where all of the contention comes in modern politics.
I want to start with the idea of political globalism and say that I think it is related, the way I understand it, it is related with the view that nations are obsolete and that any form of patriotism is a bad thing of the past. It's just mindless tribalism as far as globalists are concerned. So for me, this is something that is unbelievably pernicious, because I think that when we are talking about nations, we can think of them as extended families. And there is also a deep sense of a shared culture and a deep sense of gratitude that, for instance, I feel about my culture,
Well,
where I come from.
There are lots of different, sorry to interject here, but I'm I'm helping you out here.
Yeah.
The nation state, as it's conceived of, right? It's not only a shared culture, but there's also, group behavior is determined by genetic proximity. I'm injecting a bit of psychology here because it's very important to defining this and showing why this political globalism, which you're about to talk about, is so antithetical to human nature, is that people prefer people who are more closely genetically related to them. And that genetic relatedness is often confined to a geographic area. So your family is the smallest unit, then it's sort of your locality, the people in your area of your nation are more closely related to you as long as you're part of a static population. And then the nation state is more related to you than any other country or nation state, typically speaking, if you're a native. And so it's an extension of that. And there's this chain of relatedness, both culturally, genetically, every metric that makes up a social being.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing that shouldn't be interfered with. But sorry, do carry on. I wanted to add that caveat.
No. I think you're right. And the reason I say this is that the way I think of this is that globalists, however intelligent they are, they're not wise. They don't read the situation correctly. They are very abstract in their thinking. They think of things like, okay, global peace and whatever. I'd rather there was global peace than warfare in general. Yeah, that's okay. That makes sense. But they're not actually looking at what is going on. And they are imposing a kind of set of rules, and sometimes they're self-imposing. Societies that are, let's say, pro-globalism, that's a wrong term. Societies whose governments are pro-globalism are self-imposing rules that create a disproportionate distribution of responsibilities among the different nation states. Let me just give an example of the Agenda 2030 in Europe. A lot of, let's say, globalists behind that agenda, they're saying that there are some global problems that need, let's say, global solution. But when it comes to the global solution, they know that not everyone is going to do their bit, especially countries who have vested interests in not doing their bit. And they say, so that implies that all the other nations need to do more. But when they need to do more, for instance, when they're talking about the farmers, they are increasing their taxes, and they're also pressuring them to adopt green energy that isn't as productive, let alone in conditions of war in Europe and the economic strain that this creates. Now, when this takes place, this is a form of economic stranglement of domestic farming products, and it literally functions against the agriculture of a particular country, let's say Germany. And this makes these farming products even less competitive than the products of other countries who don't care about those rules. So globalism is a kind of system or way of thinking about things that is too abstract for those who don't have bad intentions. And for those who have bad intentions, it is a way of literally destroying from within their society in the name of, let's say, protecting a global good. Mm-hmm. So I would say one of the key aspects of globalism is the rhetoric, a global rhetoric, a focus on a global problem that has to be dealt with globally, but because it cannot be dealt with globally, it has to be the responsibilities for solving it need to be distributed heavily on Western countries.
I entirely agree.
Yeah.
And I would also add on top of that once a problem gets to a global scale, it becomes so large as to the point whereby the human mind simply cannot conceive of it objectively, and that it's framing a problem in a way which seems to maximize human fallibility rather than minimize it.
Yeah, but I want to question something here, because I think it's an interesting point here with respect to economic globalism and political globalism, because I think you treat them as distinct, right?
Well, obviously politics and the economy are not necessarily distinct, but you can separate them because there's a difference in how it's approached. I think that I did add some political caveats to the economic side of things, in that if it's a geopolitically bad decision to trade with someone, don't do it, right? That's obviously a political decision. It's literally in the name. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily want Britain to be heavily dependent on China, because that doesn't make political sense, even though they might have the cheapest goods, and therefore that would be economically beneficial to us. Of course, there are also questions of quality too, but I think that the two have an interchange, but I try and keep them separate, because for an economy to be healthy, it doesn't want that much political interference. And so I sort of approach the problem of differentiating globalism based on my view of what makes an economy healthy.
Yeah, but there's a question there whether there are some other features of political globalism that are caused by some forms of economic globalism. And let me give you the example of the demonization of any kind of patriotism and the portrayal of it in, let's say, negative light.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.